before 1976, they didn't really know what to do with the native people here in Alaska. And they knew that the reservation system didn't work very well in the lower 48, in the greater, continental US.
That's Molly Cerridwen. An Alaska native, Molly is Yupik, Siberian Yupik, and Irish. She is a member of the Manly Hot Springs tribe and the Knik tribe. Molly is a traditional knowledge holder with the University of Alaska Fairbanks Extension Services, but she is also a private practitioner of traditional healing and yoga and the founder of Shape Shifting Wellness, a clinic in Knik, Alaska. Molly's ability to apply traditional health-based practices with complementary and alternative medicine is highly valued by Alaska Extension, Public Health Services, and the Indigenous peoples of Alaska. To better understand this conversation with Molly, it is important to acknowledge the difficult and complex history between the United States and its citizens and inhabitants, and the Indigenous peoples who treasured this land, possessed it, and called it home for centuries before the continent was laid claim by foreign peoples. Listeners are encouraged to explore learning opportunities to gain a deeper understanding of the collective history of the Indigenous peoples whose lands formed the United States. But for the sake of this vodcast, it is important to understand that the Indigenous peoples native to the lands of the United States were forcibly removed from their lands, forbidden to practice their beliefs and participate in their culture, taken from their peoples, and told to farm, ranch, and survive in ways that were more familiar to new settlers. The tribes across the United States are still dealing with the trauma and trying to heal from these events.
So they didn't make the Indigenous people move off their land. In some instances, they did, but for the most part, they divided Alaska into regions, and then these regional corporations, their job is to make money for the shareholders, and the shareholders are anyone who were alive in 1976 and registered for the corporation that they were currently living in or that they had been born in. There was land exchange, and so there needs to be something in exchange back. So resources, the oil and gas industry is huge in Alaska, and that took away a lot of the hunting grounds in the indigenous lands. And by creating these corporations, then they were able to have a corporate model, which works in some ways, doesn't work in other ways, in order to make money for the shareholders so that they could continue to live a subsistence lifestyle.
This is The Facts of Life, a vodcast, where research from the field of family consumer sciences meets real-life applications. I'm Amanda Harner, a family and consumer sciences agent with the University of Georgia Extension and your host. Our guest today is Yupik traditional healer and traditional knowledge holder with the University of Alaska Fairbanks Extension, Molly Cerridwen. And these are the facts on traditional knowledge holders partnering with Cooperative Extension.
Molly, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe include what tribe you're from and what led you to Extension?
Thank you, Amanda, so much for having me. Koyana, that's Yupik for thank you. And I just wanted to say that I'm currently on the lands of the Knik tribe. I live in Knik, Alaska, just outside of Anchorage. I'm a member of the Manly Hot Springs tribe and have family ties to Tununic, Alaska, off of the western coast of Alaska and St. Lawrence Island as well. So my upbringing was normal to me, but the more I lived, the more I realized it was pretty unique in the grand scheme of a lot of human beings that I've met. I was raised by a traditional healing mother who worked as a massage therapist and started one of the first massage schools in Alaska in order to allow her to practice a lot of the hands-on healing techniques that she was taught as a child growing up from her elders. So I have 6 sisters. I'm the 7th, the youngest, lots of ladies.
That sounds so much like my best friend growing up's family.
Yeah.
Like all girls. They have one brother, but everyone
Uh,
else is a girl, and there's like 7 of them.
oh
So
yes, so 7. It gets to be a lot, lots of hair. So one of my elder sisters, she followed in my mother's footsteps as well, and worked in medical massage field for many, many years. Also training with plants and plant medicine. And while I was growing up, I just my mom worked out of our home, and the space was the most relaxing space I'd ever been in. So
hmm.
when I was about 5 and 6, I would beg my mom, please let me work on people. Like, please let me, help in some way. And so I started apprenticing at, right before my 6th birthday. I would bring people food after their sessions. My mother would do 3 to 5 hour sessions with people. So that was my first job as an apprentice. And then she started teaching me acupressure for the feet. So I would warm people up by working on their feet. And it would always be my mom's long-term clients. So I had known them for years. They had known me since I was a little kid. And although I was still a little kid, I was always wanting to learn about this field. Now, when I was 8 years old, I was lucky enough to go and spend my summers living in a wall tent behind my herbalist mentor. Her name was Deborah McCorkle. She passed away in 2017. And I would spend summers with her until I was 16, which is when I graduated high school. Every summer I would spend learning the plants, helping her make herbal tinctures, decoctions, salves, basically the whole herbal process. And she was a supplier for a couple of the natural health food stores in Fairbanks. So I remember one of my first memories is pulling like a little red wagon full of tinctures that were going to be sold at the market, walking through Fairbanks to get them to the store. And she would also join the farmers market every summer and work with the people that way. She was one of the best people I know, is one of the best people I've ever known. And I learned so much, not only about plants from her, but also about the relationship that humans have with plants.
Hmm.
And that, and my mother was also a student of hers because she had gone through, like a legitimate, you know, training through college for ethnobotany and then herbal medicine specifically. So learning from her was such an opportunity, and I am very grateful that I was able to have that opportunity because it's informed the work that I do now greatly.
So, how did you end up with Alaska Extension? Because I'm sure as people are listening to you talk, they're like, this does not sound like the typical extension activity. So, tell me a little bit about how you got connected with that, because we pride ourselves in extension about being research based. And so I think it's important to kind of make some of those connections right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I it's one of those things where it's hard to pinpoint the exact moment in time where it happened, but it kind of just like came into existence in a way. My connection with the UAF Cooperative Extension, I wanted to
Mhm.
give a shout out to my sister, Jennifer Andrewley. She's also a traditional healer, and she worked with UAA as a plant medicine uh, instructor. So I'm not sure exactly what the name of the course was, but through that work, she was paired with Lisa Strecker out of UAF, who is an ethnobotanist. And with those connections, they had initially asked Jennifer to, consider doing some videos for the Cooperative Extension and their cooperation with Rural Cap. And Jennifer just sent it to me. She said, this is a better fit for you. You're, more trained in herbal medicine. I think that the recipes that you make are more representative of what they'd like. And so I started the journey with Cooperative Extension with Rural Cap making cooking videos on using Alaska traditional foods on webinars. And then they created a series of YouTube videos on it.
According to the U.S. Forest Service, ethnobotany is the study of how people of a particular culture and region make use of indigenous or native plants. Not only are native plants used for food and medicine throughout many cultures around the world, they are also used in ceremonial and spiritual rituals. In addition, these ancient practices are used to make textiles, hygiene products, and much more. Ethnobotany is still an important discipline today. Cultures have passed sophisticated knowledge about plants and their uses for generations. Universities such as UAF provide training in ethnobotany with an emphasis on honoring the cultural importance and traditions of the people groups that they aim to serve, but they also apply rigorous and ethical conduct of research. Rural CAP, or the Rural Alaska Community Action Program, is a private statewide nonprofit organization working to improve the quality of life for low income Alaskans. Founded in 1965, they believe all Alaskans have the right to maintain their cultural heritage and close relationships to the land while protecting their economic and human potential. You can find Molly's YouTube videos on the University of Alaska Fairbanks Extension YouTube channel at youtube.com/@UAF Extension. From the homepage, you can either type in Molly's name or just click on the playlist tab, scroll down to Cooking with Alaska Gathered and Grown with Yupik traditional healer Molly Cerridwen. If you want to try one of Molly's videos, we recommend the skillet eggs with potatoes, greens, and edible flowers. Many of the ingredients in this video can be found in Georgia or easily substituted for greens and edible flowers native to our state.
Heidi Rader, who's the agent up at UAF, she watched those videos and said, hey, I think we should bring her to the villages and have some of this knowledge brought into communities to fill that education gap for some of the traditional practices of not only harvesting foods, harvesting different plants, but also different ways to prepare them. Because even in, greater America, it can be really difficult to eat a balanced, healthy diet.
Mhm.
When it literally grows outside your door and you can not have to go to the grocery store and spend $10 on a head of lettuce in the village, which is a real thing, very expensive to ship produce in, and it's not in the best quality.
Yeah.
So empowering people to identify the plants that live in their area, then it opens up a whole new world of eating a more balanced, healthy meal, which is very near and dear to my heart. And so my title at the UAF Cooperative Extension is Traditional Knowledge Holder. So with UAF looking for almost a liaison to an Indigenous person who was knowledgeable in different cultures within Alaska, because we're not just one group of Indigenous people, we are many.
Mhm.
So I am there to reach out to tribal communities, to the people within the tribes, and also be a liaison to the agents within the cooperative extension and talk about, even cultural differences. Like they talk about island time in Hawaii, but we have village time in Alaska. And
Mm.
it's a real thing. So sometimes I'll hear from my colleagues like, I reached out to this community, I reached out to them many times, and I just haven't heard anything back. And I'm like, well, it's only been 2 weeks. I mean, That's not bad.
That's normal.
That can be slow. Like the priority on technology, while technology has come to the villages and I mean, just within the last 10 years have built so many cell towers that a lot of these remote villages do have cell access. It's like it went from no phone to a cell phone. They didn't really have that transition. And so they don't really necessarily treat it in the same way or with the same level of importance that people who were, kind of raised around the gradual increase in technology view it. So, and certain language barriers, or little cultural things. And then the safety of the community and knowing that they're going to have a representative of their own to advocate for themselves when sometimes it can be really difficult for people to advocate for themselves. I work a lot with trauma and epigenetic trauma. So there can be this underlying distrust of anything that is other. And that could be said about any group of people who
Mhm.
feel a little bit distrustful of that which they do not know or understand. There are elders alive that remember a very different Alaska, a very strict, very military controlled Alaska. It's so multifaceted that there's not just one solution. And kind of in going back to what I was saying and how like each family had something that they were very good at, something that they were very knowledgeable in, and then they trained their daughters in that style. So some women in the community were master beaders, making these beautiful beadwork art, and that in and of itself is a type of medicine. And there were those who knew plants and then kept that going. There were those that knew the best ways to tan hides, and they kept that going in their family line. And because of it being so separate, the families not really, being scared that maybe if they let other people know within the community that they were keeping those traditions alive, that it was an increased chance of getting caught. So I feel like another one of my big jobs when I go into communities are finding other traditional knowledge holders, people who have learned these healing modalities, these medicine, art medicine, singing medicine, language medicine, dance medicine, drumming medicine, all of these different kinds of medicines that really are more like whole body healing, right? Spirit, body, mind, and spirit healing, that finding these people and empowering them, like now is the time, like it's legal, we can practice our beliefs, we can practice that which we learned. And it's almost like I try to invite them into kind of the larger community, because I don't know everything about my culture. I only know what I learned directly and then what I've learned from other people. So it's like I'm trying to broaden kind of a network of community with many different people practicing many different forms of healing, so that it's a more well-rounded approach instead of just what my family kept the knowledge of.
You may be wondering what Molly means when she talks about medicine. I asked Molly to clarify her use of this term for us so we can better understand.
In a modern society, right, medicine is something, you can go to the over the counter or get prescribed from your doctor, and it serves a specific purpose,
Mhm.
right? It's been synthesized in a lab, and most of those products have been synthesized from plants. They've found alkaloids that do specific things, and through chemistry, biochemistry, they're able to extract specific components and create medicine. And in traditional healing, we believe that every person has medicine within themselves. So it's a special medicine that makes them unique, that they have to offer the world. And so their medicine could be singing. And when they sing, it vibrates in people's bodies in such a way that it creates an emotional response, thus inducing a healing process. And so some people's medicine is listening, right? And those people are drawn to the listening professions, right? We have psychotherapists, psychiatrists, that's a type of medicine, that's behavioral health. And in traditional healing, a listener, that's the medicine they have to offer their community. It can look like so many different things, right? Some people are really good with numbers, and their medicine is being able to take something that makes no sense to one person, compute it in their brain, and turn it into something that other people can understand. So it's a gift that they're offering. So it takes the pressure off of one person. Like we have medicine people, we have shamans and healers that are dedicated to healing the community, but we also want to empower the community to know that we wouldn't be whole without every single person that's a part of that community. And every single individual has a unique contribution that they offer, their own heart medicine, if you want to say that way, that they can use to help heal the community, just being who they are, being their authentic self, tapping into like their true nature, not fighting it or resisting it or forcing themselves to be someone who they're not, but just like honoring who they are and what their strengths are. That's so powerful, and it's empowering as well. And it allows people autonomy. And I truly believe in autonomy for in all aspects, but especially on our own personal healing journey, so that we don't have to feel like we have to go to a doctor. I mean, sometimes, yes, please go to a doctor if you need to. I'm not saying don't go to a doctor. There is very specific reasons to go. Modern medicine, Western medicine, performing surgeries, life-saving surgeries. It's amazing. It's a miracle in a lot of ways. It's more quality of life. So these smaller events that sometimes build, right? Smaller traumas or smaller disagreements or smaller events that can cause discomfort in a human being, having people in their community that they can reach out to, that they know will listen, or that they know will sit quietly and let them be with them, or they know will drum for them and drum for their loved ones, and hold that space of love and caring. That is our medicine. And so I feel like in this modern world, we talk about like, what's our destiny? Like, what are we put on this earth to do? That is very reminiscent of personal heart medicine that every individual provides. Instead of letting things build up in a way where I feel like in the modern world, we wait until it's so full inside of us that it's like we're going to explode if we don't deal with it. Instead of that mindset, it's more like, let's deal with it as it comes, and then allow our community to support us.
From your perspective, what is the most important reason for having traditional knowledge holders as a part of Alaska Extension?
I love that question. I really do. Because a lot of my work has been through the healthcare model. Like I attended pre-med. I was a biology student. I am very interested in science and chemistry and alchemy. I mean, that's herbalism for you. The importance to me for traditional knowledge holders is that, and I think we need more, because there are gaps in our knowledge base. There are people who have held on to these traditional ways of being that have allowed people to survive in this climate for over 10,000 years of recorded history. Like, so all of this infrastructure that was created in the last 100 years, 100+ years here in Alaska, was to make living in Alaska easier for people. But people were living here thousands of years before that, and not just living, they were growing populations, and they were expanding villages, and they were able to create housing, dwellings that survived the extreme temperatures, that were warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And some of those traditions have been lost and forgotten, and the knowledge is still there in some of the elders, and they will pass it down to the people, but it's really hard to actually put that in action. And so by allowing people to have the opportunity to learn about these ancient practices, these ancient ways of being, of communing with the land, of living on this land in a sustainable way, right? Because a lot of the practices that modern culture employ are not sustainable practices. It's, let's get the resources we need from the land, and then
we'll figure it out.
It's like we'll deal with that when it happens. But the mindset of our ancestors was really, how can we live with the land, thinking about it as like another living being? How can we give back just as much as we take? How can we only take what we need to survive, and then make use of every single part of what we harvest? An interesting part of that is, traditionally we would ferment. So a lot of the ways we would preserve our foods is through making dry meat, making smoked meat, and fermenting different fishes. So, and moose and game meat, but often fish fermentation. And Alaska has high amounts of botulism in the soil. So what was really interesting that researchers found out was, in the old days, when they were weaving baskets out of these specific types of grasses, they would weave the baskets and then dig a hole, a fairly deep hole, place the fish in with that had been soaked in seawater. So a salt brine, pretty high salinity, with the cold, the salinity of different oceans vary. So the Bering Sea and the Arctic Ocean have slightly higher salinity counts. So they were soaking in a saltwater brine, and then maybe putting some herbs in there. Some of the herbs had natural antimicrobial effects, antibacterial effects. Then they would weight that with more of these woven grass mats, and then weight it with rocks, and then bury it for a season. And they didn't have botulism problems. When the West came into Alaska and the advent of plastic, people were like, this is genius. I don't have to weave a basket anymore. I could use this plastic container, and I can ferment my fish in that. And that's when the botulism started happening.
Oh, interesting.
Botulism. So they found that the botulism wouldn't grow in the environment that was highly aerated using these specific plants that were woven. but it would thrive in plastic containers. And so even now when we can, we use glass containers because they're not porous. The plastic is too porous, right? And even when we ferment things, we do it in a different way. So some people are going back and doing some traditional basket weaving techniques, and then they actually test it for botulism.
Okay.
And amazing. Like that does work. Those techniques work. It's when we tried to mix the two using, modern inventions like plastic, and then that was just a breeding ground for, and all of the other variables were the same except the plastic. So that was a big one that we've learned. And another one is smoking our fish, smoking our meat. So by hang drying our animal meat, our fish meat, we would give it a chance to kind of form a crust, almost like how they hang prosciutto to form a crust. And then we would create strips of meat, have a smokehouse, a little shed of sorts with wire or with wooden racks along the top, and then a fire that we would use. We would start with dry wood and then add green wood so that the smoke was always going, very, very smoky and dry. And keep that going for, an extended period of time. And it varies on the location in Alaska, because some area of Alaska is a temperate rainforest and some areas of Alaska is a tundra desert. So very different climates. And it was just by the feel of the meat, by seeing how does this crack. And it's very similar to people making jerky in dehydrators today, right? You still have to check your jerky and make sure it doesn't snap. It doesn't want to be brittle. You want to be able to crack it, but to make sure it's fully done. But you don't want it so hard that it could hurt your teeth. So it was about the feel of getting to know what it was you were drying, what it was you were working with. And often those use saltwater brines. So submerging the meat in a saltwater brine and then hanging to dry and then hanging to smoke, and smoked meat. It's smoked fish is one of my favorite things in the world. And it allowed food freedom in the winter, right? So we would preserve all this food and then put it in underground stashes, which in Alaska we have permafrost. So even in the summer, if you dig down deep enough, you can hit a layer of ice of permafrost, a cold storage unit. So in some ways there was mild refrigeration, but yeah, storing dried meat to preserve it. And then once canning came to Alaska, people would smoke the salmon or the meat still and then decide to can it. So then it became a new kind of like, to me, it's a blending of the cultures of canning techniques and smoking. You don't smoke it all the way to where it's a jerky. You smoke it to get the flavor of that smoked fish, and then you pack it into the jar, and then you can it. And the emphasis on pressure canning for the low acid foods, of course, but our high acid foods like our wild berries, water bath canning works great. So, and it's a healthier alternative to some of the ways that we would store our berries for winter, which would be a gudok. If you're not familiar with a gudok, it is sometimes called Eskimo ice cream. But
yes, I have heard of this.
yeah, so it would be whipped animal fat. So you'd take caribou fat or moose fat and you would literally like whip it in a mortar pestle until it gets almost fluffy. And then you'd add a little bit of fermented seal oil, right? This all sounds really delicious. The most delicious part is adding all of these fresh berries. So the fat would encapsulate the berry, and the vitamin C and antioxidants in the berry would help protect. So it was like this symbiotic relationship, and the agouti could last all the way till spring, and the berries would not go sour. So this was a way of preserving berries and also providing the much needed fat in order to synthesize the lean meat diet. Or sometimes when there were not very good harvests of meat, we were relying heavily on plants, that women were always collecting plants to save. So different drying techniques or fermentation techniques or preservation techniques, cold larder storage techniques for saving the plants in order to supplement our diet with that and the agouti in order to assimilate the nutrients. So, that's a great example of the marriage of, the modern food preservation and these ancient food preservation techniques. And
Yeah, it's super interesting.
one of the things I really love is so UAF is where the Cold Research Center is located. So they make advancements all the time in how humans can live at colder and colder temperatures. So they've been studying some of the designs of these semi-subterranean dwellings of the indigenous peoples of Alaska, the far north, and northern Canada, Norway, all of the circumpolar north. We can think of the Arctic Circle as, I think of it as its own kind of continent. We're very similar. Greenland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Alaska, northern Canada. It's also in the summer, there's not a lot of ice. I mean, in the old days, there wasn't a lot of ice, and now there's no ice in the Arctic Ocean. So sea dwelling groups could travel easily amongst all of these communities. And when you look at those communities, they're very similar. So people in Greenland can understand Inupiat, Inuit, some Yupik, the Sami. When you look at their parkas, the Sami of Norway, their parkas are very similar to Yupik parkas, except they have a point on their head instead of a. And they farmed caribou. They created domestic reindeer essentially from their caribou population. So in the 1930s, the United States government decided to bring over a group of Sami reindeer herders to teach indigenous Alaskans how to harvest reindeer, or how to harvest the caribou that are abundant here, or especially were abundant here, and herd them, raise them as livestock on the land that they live in order to have an industry. That industry didn't continue. There are still some people, some groups that will herd reindeer, but it's very similar. The cultures and the plants that grow in the region of the circumpolar north is so similar. So by having, an institution like the University of Alaska Fairbanks that's dedicated to cold weather research, they've found that there are low spots in Alaska, right? So where Alaska Natives inhabited are the warmer parts of Alaska, and it still gets pretty cold. Certain areas drop below sea level and are quite marshy. So they've placed these probes, temperature probes, out in lowland marshes where there's myths from Alaska elders that it's like, don't go there. Like if you go there, you will die. And they've measured temperatures that are comparable to Antarctica, temperatures that like -100. I heard once they had measured one pocket of lowland because we get cold inversion. So once the cold settles into these low areas, it's really hard for them to lift out. And so that's true. We get ice fog in the cold regions of Alaska in the winter. And so once the ice fog comes in if you go up on a hill, you can actually see the ice fog kind of hugging the rivers, because the rivers are the low areas. And you can see a definitive line between the sky and the ice fog, and you can't even see the buildings below.
Hmm.
Chimney smoke, it'll go up, it'll hit that cold inversion where it meets the warm, and it will turn parallel. It won't escape into the atmosphere because of the pressure changes between the cold and the warm. And so with that research, they found that there's a reason why the indigenous people didn't inhabit those areas, because they're the coldest areas in Alaska. So that has informed their research in new ways to build houses that are more sustainable and more economical. Right now, they're not super affordable to build for the average person, because a lot of the technology is still new, but really it's based on this semi-subterranean dwelling with openings not at the sides of the house, but at the top. Being able to go down into a house instead of opening up the house from the side. And then the main part of the house is actually somewhat underground so that it's temperature controlled, just like a larder would be. It would be cool in the summer and stay warm in the winter. And then they wouldn't have to spend as much money on insulating products or time collecting the insulating products.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
So some of the research is being done, but I think that it is important to have more people with Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous ways of being to speak up and to share not only their story, but the knowledge that was passed down to them, because it's not written down. It's not
Mhm.
knowledge that you can go to a library and look up. It's knowledge that was taught to them from the time they were a little child, and in repetition of stories in different ways, and just being and living in the environment in which they were living in, and seeing, what was it that needed to be done. And if you didn't do those things, not only was your quality of life quite low, but there was a high possibility of not surviving the winter. So, like, literally, your life was on the line if you weren't willing to listen and take advice. And then within that realm of learning, innovation, right? Taking what
Mhm.
and maybe, using your own gifts, your own medicine to be like, maybe I can make this better. Maybe I can tweak this just a little bit and make a better version, starting to use pine or spruce pitch to seal the garments instead of fat, those waterproof garments, or sealing the boats with that pitch instead of using the fats. So within the knowledge, there's also progress. There's also an opportunity for growth. And
Mhm.
so to me, modern day traditional healing, it's never going to look like it looked 100 to 3,000 to 10,000 years ago,
Yeah.
because human beings, and human beings are designed to learn and to grow. And so even within my own personal history, I've learned from so many different cultures. One of my favorite things to do is to travel, to meet with the indigenous people of that land, and to learn about their traditional practices. And not only do I learn so many cool things and so many like different things I might not have thought of, but I learned just how similar we are, more similar than different, more
Mhm.
connected than separate. And I think that's a really important lesson for me personally, but also a really important lesson for a lot of the clients I work with, because in this age of technology, a lot of people feel separate. They feel disconnected from people. They feel like they're not maybe part of a community. And by tapping back into these certain cultural practices, it's like a gentle reminder, like a warm hug from the inside that we are connected, like, and we are more alike than we are different, and more alike than maybe even we want to admit.
Sometimes, yeah. But no, I agree with you. Sometimes our sometimes we use different words to describe things that really are driving at the heart of something else that is very similar. There might be some differences that, you know, are notable differences, but it's not as like night and day as sometimes we feel like it is if we really are listening and trying to understand other people's perspectives. Um, what would you say is your biggest takeaway and reward from working with Alaska Extension?
One of my favorite things about working with the Alaska Extension is being able to physically visit different communities and
Mm.
see people face to face, real people, right? It's not through a computer screen, it's not through a telephone call, it's not through a website or like an idealized version. It's just as they are in that moment right there. And being in the presence of someone allows for an exchange of energy. And I feel really energized when I travel to these communities, because even in the communities that sometimes there's trepidation, even towards me, right? Sometimes, even within different native groups, it's like, oh, like our ancestors used to fight. So like sometimes there's that, like, oh, we're an Athabascan village or we're an Eskimo village and you're not of that. Sometimes there's that. So even with that, just being an authentic person, like just being myself, bringing just what I know, just what I am to that community, and then watching how attitudes can change and perspectives can change. I think that is one of the greatest healing opportunities for a community at large, being able to meet people where they're at and go from there. Like, I'm not trying to force anything on anyone. I want to hear what they want to know.
Mhm.
And if I don't know it, I'll say, I don't know that. Like, do you have an elder that maybe they could teach me? And really empowering the community to realize that they know more than they think they know. And once we get that conversation going, and it's much easier in person, but once we get the conversation going, people sharing their stories and talking about how their mom used to do things, or how their grandma or grandfather used to talk, or the stories they tell, everyone ends up learning. The transformation of conversation, right? Often it can start very light, and it's like, you know, getting to know you kind of conversation, and by the end of it, it's just like it's real. It's real life. It's talking about the reality that a lot of people have suffered from trauma. A lot of people have trauma that their family has experienced, and they're trying to find ways to deal with it. They don't want to carry that burden anymore. They want to be free from the burden of holding on to the terrible things that have happened to either them or their loved ones. And so all of these, food preservation, arts and crafts, drumming, all of these are different, just different avenues different, whatever they're connecting with, whatever, their medicine is attracted to, that's the conduit to healing. It's about, even when you have an injured shoulder or a cut, feeling safe enough and empowered enough to know that there are other areas of your life that can be fulfilling, and that even if the shoulder injury is something that you're going to have to live with for the rest of your life, they can accept themselves as they are and then move forward, so that they're not stuck in that position of being like, I was a victim of this thing, this happened to me. They can take some accountability for themselves and be empowered enough to heal in a deeper way that allows acceptance of life. I mean, life is a roller coaster. We never really know what's going to happen. We can try to make as many predictions as we can, but if if our mind isn't in the right space, if our heart isn't in the right place, then it's really hard for our body to be in the right place. So it's all connected. And of course, by working on our body as well through physical exercise, other hands-on healing modalities, those can also help the heart space and the mind space, because it is all connected. But really, it's about, like allowing, kind of like uplifting a community to know that everything they need is already inside of them. They already know. They know the things that they want to learn, and those are the things that are going to help them.
I really, really like where you said the community already knows what they want and need. And even as individuals and at the community level, know what they're looking for. It's just a matter of being able to sometimes articulate it in a way that, in our case, Extension can step in and help be a piece of that picture. It might not be the full piece of the picture, but we can be a catalyst in some form. I think that kind of hits the nail on the head. I've really enjoyed this conversation and listening to you. There's a lot of really good takeaways, especially to allow people and people groups to retain the things that are really important and meaningful to them and traditional to them, that they want to hold on to, while at the same time still appropriately being able to step in and share new knowledge that's being learned. Hopefully you've enjoyed it.
I have so much. Thank you. I really appreciate you asking all these wonderful questions and really wanting to listen and learn a little bit about what I do. I really find a lot of fulfillment in the work that I do, and it's a fine line between work and just the way I live my life. But my dream for Cooperative Extension is that not only more traditional knowledge bearers come into the fold, and perhaps in the future they're able to go into communities and have an on-site traditional knowledge bearer that is able to join in on these workshops and offer information, but also that, like, across the United States, the different land owning grants that house Cooperative Extension, that they also start communicating with the Indigenous peoples of the area and learning from them. I mean, even like with the three sisters, the corn, the beans, and the peas, like that symbiotic relationship and how it fixes the nitrogen, like that is a valid farming technique, and it's not monoculture. And there's many different things that are going on with monoculture, but going back to certain practices of the indigenous people that were farming the land in America, and how it could also possibly completely change the sustainability of our food resources. I think that is a very exciting future for the Cooperative Extension.
The Facts of Life is a program by the University of Georgia Extension, an equal opportunity affirmative action veteran disability institution. Research-based resources referenced in and related to this episode of Facts of Life can be found in the episode notes and description information. The views and thoughts expressed in this video podcast are the speaker's own and do not necessarily represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of the University of Georgia or the guest organizations and/or employers. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. The University of Georgia name, as well as those of guest organizations and all forms and abbreviations, are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. These are the Facts of Life. Thanks for joining us. Check out our website at facsoflife.extension.uga.edu. That's FACS of life.extension.uga.edu.